Hey guys, and welcome. We all know life can be stranger than fiction, but at times it can also be more violent, dark, and malevolent than anything a creative mind could come up with. And despite feeling like some things can only happen in the movies, the reality is that they happen all around us. And a lot of the time, as long as none of these events interact with us directly, it's okay. It's easy to feel somewhat invincible. Say things like, I would let this happen to me, or I'd never blindly follow orders. So we often say that, but is that really the case? And the movies I want to talk about explore these ideas in a way that may feel a little too close to home, since they're all based on real events. So, without further ado, let's dive into some horror movies that were based on true stories. And the first movie I want to talk about is Snowtown. And some people also call it the Snowtown Murders. And the first thing you need to know about this movie is that it doesn't really feel like a movie in a traditional sense. It feels close to being dropped into someone else's life. And let me tell you, the movie wastes no time and pretty much immediately drops these big bombs in the form of abuse right from the get go. And it's based on a real series of killings that took place in South Australia in the 1990s, which already puts it in a different category. The movie pulls from actual events surrounding John Bunting and his circle, and what makes it especially unsettling is how ordinary everything looks, which, to be fair, is the case with all the movies which excel at portraying how abuse and violence just hide out in the open. So we follow Jamie, a teenager who's growing up in a household that feels unstable even before anything explicitly violent happens. So there's poverty, tension, and what often happens, a rotating door of questionable adults. It's the kind of environment where boundaries are already blurred. So obviously when John Bunting enters the picture, he is not immediately seen as a villain. Better, he arrives or presents himself as a solution. It obviously helps that John's charismatic in this very grounded, believable way. He talks about cleaning up the neighborhood, protecting people, and getting rid of those he sees as harmful. And look, there's a logic to it, at least on the surface. He offers structure, confidence, and a sense of control in a place where none really exists. And Jamie, who's 16, along with others, just gravitates towards that. And the movie does a fantastic job of showing how impressionable Jamie's character is. Again, he's only 16, he has no role models, and even though John's behavior starts becoming questionable pretty early on, the teen is so desperate for a fatherly figure that he just goes along with it. And it's very subtle how the conversations shift, the way certain people are talked about. It really shows how these situations never arise out of nowhere. The groundwork has to be laid down first. Then you test the people you want to control to see how far you can push them and ideally implicate them. And once they're no longer a clear victim of yours, they're now a co-conspirator. And that ties into the bigger idea the film is circling. How easily people can be pulled into something horrific when it's framed the right way. And this isn't a story about a single evil person operating in isolation. It's about influence. It's about grooming in a broader sense. About how someone like John can identify vulnerability and slowly reshape the people around him until they're participating in something they might have once thought unthinkable. And Jamie especially isn't portrayed as inherently violent or cruel. Kind of the opposite. And on top of that, he's very impressionable. He wants approval and stability, and John provides that, but at a cost. And watching that transformation is honestly more disturbing than anything else in the film. It doesn't even feel exaggerated, but kind of plausible. And that's kind of where I land on this movie. I didn't find it enjoyable in any traditional sense. And obviously, it's not meant to be. And it's not even really something that I'd casually recommend unless someone specifically asked me for something grounded, bleak, and rooted in real world horror. But I do think it's really effective. And again, it excels at portraying the way the situation unfolded. And what I really appreciate is that it didn't glamorize what happened. There was no attempt to make John fascinating in this larger than life way. If anything, the movie goes out of its way to strip that away. He's not presented as some mastermind. He's just a man who figured out how to manipulate the people around him. And that is enough. It leaves you with that uncomfortable question. How much of this comes down to circumstance? And how many people placed in the same environment would have made different choices? The second movie I wanted to talk about is called Compliance. And look, Compliance sounds almost boring when you try to explain it, so if you haven't heard of this movie, I really hope to inspire you to watch it, as it's just like a fascinating study on human behavior. Again, it's based on a real case, which is something I'm going to have to repeat with every movie, just to remind you all, because it's easy to forget. And trust me when I say this, if this were fiction, you could probably write it off as exaggerated or unrealistic, but it's not. And variations of this exact scenario happened multiple times across the US, which raises a very important question right from the start. How does something like this happen more than once? And the movie opens in a fast food restaurant, and we're first introduced to Sandra, who's the manager. She's already stressed, juggling staff, dealing with complaints, and trying to keep things running smoothly. And then the phone rings. A man on the other end claims to be a police officer. He says that one of Sandra's employees, Becky, has been accused of theft. He sounds calm, authoritative, and completely in control. He gives instructions and Sandra follows them. And at first, it feels procedural, like reasonable even. You can almost understand why she doesn't question it right away. Because nothing that happens next feels like it should escalate the way it does. Each step is just a little worse than the last, but it's never so extreme that it immediately breaks the illusion. It's so gradual and carefully placed, which I guess again is another pattern that we can recognize, how gradually these things seem to happen. Slowly, the requests become more invasive and inappropriate, more obviously wrong, and yet they keep going along with it. And as you're watching this unfold, and the entire time you're thinking, just hang up, just stop, just use your brain for 2 seconds. But despite the discomfort, nobody takes a step back to reevaluate the situation. And even the people who feel clearly uncomfortable, they hesitate, they'll defer, look to someone else to take responsibility. It becomes this loop of follow the order, question it briefly, but then comply anyway. I wanted to say how this movie shows how easily authority can override basic common sense, but even I had to remind myself that this movie actually happened. It's crazy how far confidence can get you, because apparently sounding confident is enough. Sandra clings to that certainty because it gives her a framework. She's not making decisions. She's just following instructions. And then there's Becky, the main victim of this event. And it's quite uncomfortable how passive she's forced to be. She's confused and scared, but she's trying to cooperate because she thinks that there must have been some kind of mistake. She expects the situation to resolve itself if she just goes along with it, which, if you think about it, is not at all irrational. In the same way that speak no evil makes you question politeness, compliance makes you question obedience. At what point do you stop following instructions and start thinking for yourself? Apparently, much later than most people would like to admit. And last but not least, arguably even the worst case of all the ones mentioned here is the case of Sylvia Likens. A case so terrible, 2 movies and some books were based on it. And while I see The Girl Next Door, the movie based on Jack Ketchum's book of the same title, mentioned far more often whenever the case of Sylvia Likens is mentioned, and American Crime is also worth mentioning. There's a distinction between the two, and in order to stay true to the topic of this video, I will be focusing on the latter movie, which is an American Crime. So, what's the distinction between the two, you ask? So the book, The Girl Next Door, again, is based on a fictionalized story of Likens, and plays out in the eyes of her neighbor. So the events are true to an extent, since this is a fictional book and later movie, a lot of creative freedoms were taken. And the American Crime, however, is more courtroom-style drama, but it does relay the events as they were in a more accurate manner. So it's a real girl, real people, and real decisions that somehow escalated into something completely horrific. So in the movie, we're introduced to Sylvia and her younger sister as they're left in the care of Gertrude Baniszewski, a woman who at first glance just seems overwhelmed. She has kids of her own, her house is chaotic, money's tight, and everything feels unstable, but not dangerous. It's the kind of environment when you think, okay, this may not be ideal, but it'll probably be fine. And as was the case with the previous features, things don't go from normal to extreme overnight. It's small things at first. Rules, punishments, a tone that feels slightly off. And Gertrude begins singling Sylvia out, criticizing her, and accusing her of things that don't even really make sense. And the more you watch, the more you realize that there's no real reason behind it. And Sylvia doesn't fight back in any meaningful way. And it's because she's too kind. She's trying to understand what's happening, trying to navigate it, hoping it will pass if she just does what she's told. And if you've seen anything like Nothing Bad Can Happen, or even Compliance, you already know where this is going. The instinct to endure instead of resist becomes a trap. Meanwhile, the house itself turns into something else entirely. What starts as a one woman's cruelty slowly spreads. The other kids get involved. Neighbors drift in and out. And instead of anyone stepping in, the situation becomes normalized. Yes, Gertrude's being abusive, but other people adapt to that behavior very quickly. There's this awful sense that everyone knows something is wrong, but no one wants to be the one to say it out loud. And so it continues and escalates. And I found myself getting increasingly frustrated, not just with Gertrude, but who's obviously beyond reasoning with, but with everyone else. The kids, the visitors, the adults who pass through and choose not to intervene. And there are so many moments where someone could have said, "This isn't okay," and stopped it. Even knowing that this movie is based on a real story, I found myself hoping that it was gonna end differently. So it goes without saying that this is a miserable viewing experience. It sits in that same category as movies that are important but hard to justify putting yourself through unless you really know what you're getting yourself into. And on that note, thank you so much for watching. If you have any movies that shook you up and you just couldn't believe that they were based on a real story, even if they're not necessarily horror, please let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you enjoy the video, please like and or subscribe. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.